Hello, and welcome to the Optimized Equine podcast. In this episode, we go into more detail about Barnaby, the horse that was a big catalyst for change in my career and my life. What started as a fairy tale turned into heartbreak, but in his 6 short years on Earth, he taught me some of the most valuable lessons of my life. Most importantly, he taught me how to listen, he taught me how to really know a horse deeply, and he taught me how to trust my gut. Vanessa gets a bit technical and shares her insights about Barnaby's unique physical challenges when he was alive, as well as some of the findings from his post-mortem report that may not have been discovered any other way. So, while there are certainly some sad parts to his story, I will always cherish the lessons that Barnaby brought, and I hope that you will too.
Anywho, where were we? We were once chatting about how we met, and I mentioned Mr. Barnaby. Who
isn't that him in the picture behind you? Or is that another horse?
Stunning, handsome horse right here.
Yeah.
Only 5 months old there at his little breed inspection. That's what that was from.
Oh, and what breed was he again?
He was registered with RPSI, which stands for 4 German words that I will not try to say for you. They no longer, well, I won't say they no longer exist, but basically they are now, well, now I can't remember what they're even called. Sorry, blanking. They have a new name. There's some other breed now.
He's a warm blood.
He's a warm
blood. Yeah.
That's the fast answer there. But
yeah.
Anywho, and so that brings us back to why. Why did you need to seek out a special person for your 4-year-old? Well, that question plagued me as well. So by the time we, seeked you out because of a recommendation, Barnaby had seen several vets, and he was only 4, and he had not been hardly ridden. He was started under saddle and did not do hardly anything because he didn't stay sound very long. And that was even with my, not that I was perfect back then by any means, but that was with this whole I just, do no harm kind of thing. I felt like all the baby horses that we dealt with in a more traditional way, really didn't have it great. So I was really trying to be, if anything, I think I was overly cautious and could have done more with him, except, if I had, maybe I would have known sooner. I don't know. But at the end of the day, tried to start him kindly and as best I could, and he just never stayed sound. And it was always it was never a straightforward lameness ever. It was always a little something. And it's not.
And wasn't it in the hind end?
It usually was something that looked weird in the hind end.
Right.
Sometimes you would see little things that maybe looked like front, but you'd always just be questioning if it was coming from behind. Not you, just me, everyone that looked at Barnaby would. At the end of the day, I feel like we had several different treatment attempts. And this is not to say anything bad about anybody that attempted these treatments. They, nobody ever had a real diagnosis. It was always, this is weird, this is not right. Yes, there's that inconsistency, but there was never a reason why that anybody could find. And I had him his entire life, literally, so I knew certain things had never happened. I knew he was not, cranked in like a, all terrible as a 2-year-old. I know he never had any crazy trailer accidents. There's all these things that sometimes you don't know when you get a horse, but with him, we knew none of those things happened. Yet things were just kind of always off. And I would go with a treatment of some kind, whether that was rest, whether it was different shoes, different plan here or there. By the time he saw you at 4, he had already had his SIs injected. And And even at the time, when I did it, it was like, why in the world would you need to inject the SIs of a 4-year-old?
4-year-old,
who's
yeah.
done no work, hardly
Yeah.
any work. What is the deal? But at the time, by then, I'd already tried several other things, and nothing worked. So at that point, what do you have to lose? If
Right.
people are telling you there's discomfort, let's see if that helps. Well, why not? Nothing else is lasting. Things would act like there was an improvement. You would get a little improvement, but then it would either come back as he got into more work again, or something new would show up, a new little something.
Yeah, and I almost remember you telling me, and I think I responded with, is it vertigo? There was a couple weird instances you had, right, where you were attempting to saddle or mount, and it almost was like he got wobbly, woozy, almost like wanted to pass out.
Yeah. Those were,
I remember that too.
Random times, and they were so random you could never put together like what the heck was going on.
Right.
But, randomly just seem not right, and there's no
connected.
There's not a lot more detail to put to it other than I knew him really well, and I was around him all the time, and it's like things aren't right. And by that point, I really knew something was weird. In the beginning, it was just like something weird physically, but he's developing and this and that, and he's a wiggly little noodle baby, and you just kind of let stuff just kind of goes along. And then by the time stuff like that was happening, it was pretty clear, like, this horse is not totally I'm not going to say totally normal, but he was not strong enough to consistently do what we wanted. And it's not like he was it wasn't like a 3-legged lameness or anything ever. It was always really small stuff, really not right. But yes, would have times where he would seem like he might even fall over. And then there'd be times where that wasn't anything like what was going on. It just literally did seem like a physical, maybe this hind is a little this or that. So yes, 4-year-old horse got his SIs injected. We had tried some other things. There's other times that I would be told, well, you tried this, you worked him again, it came back. I guess what you need to do is just work him so that, he's either going to get better or it's going to break worse, and then you'll know. And that's just, I understand why they have to say that. And I get it. Like you try to build him up and he's either going to get stronger or he's not, and it's going to get worse. But that just was, not a fun way to have to like think about any of it. Like, that doesn't work right, but just keep doing it. I know sometimes that's what we have to do, but it didn't ultimately work for him.
Well, and I think like there's probably a lot of horse owners out there that, know their horses better than anybody, and they may have certain feelings about, something's just not right, something's off, and you can kind of talk about that journey and how frustrating that was, not really being able to find answers, but knowing that there was something not right with your horse.
Yeah, and it is not a easy road to go on, and really nothing with Barnaby was easy other than just loving him because he was so sweet and cute. But it is really hard, especially it's really hard when you get info from a vet, and it's not like I would believe them or I would be on the same page, I thought at the time. But then when things would fall back apart or not improve, it was like, well, I guess I'll go seek out something else. And I definitely, all the way up until, the end of things, there was definitely always other people chattering in the background about like, well, why don't you just get on with it? Like, you're basically people implying that you're making stuff up. Like, you saw the vets did their thing, and go get on with it, and this type of horsemanship is what allowed me to break out of that. Certainly in my previous horsing life, when I was doing the hunter jumper thing, I would go with that. A vet says like, this horse checks out, or we did this and it feels better. And so you just kind of treat it as if everything that happens beyond that is behavioral. And I think that's, that's definitely a huge difference in how I am now versus my previous life. And that's how we got here. And there's definitely points where I would question myself, like, is this like, am I just, is this me? Is this myself getting in my way of progress? I do think in Barnaby's case, whether it's fortunately or unfortunately, I don't know, but ultimately he showed me with, in my mind, just no doubt. I didn't have to have doubt anymore. He showed me that what needed to happen happened, and that was fine. But I definitely had that experience of being in that other life where, like your vet tells you your horse is good and you just go with it. And that's that.
Yeah. Yeah. And they have, kind of this definitive air, right, about what they say because they're veterinarians and they're doing the best they can. But sometimes things go so much deeper, and not to jump ahead, but you actually, had him looked at post-mortem, and there were some concerning things found there that I don't know if they would have been found diagnostically any other way, so there was something definitely there going on, but people weren't able to really get to the root of that.
Yeah. And even the post-mortem information, even that was something I had to like kind of wrestle with for a while, because as you know, even the information I got there was a list of abnormalities, but was it a diagnosis or like a
True.
No,
Yeah,
it was not. And
true.
It's kind of the same thing, as you still would have people who don't know crap, quite frankly, about his situation or what we did or didn't do or whatever, that would still, at that point, they would think, well, that horse got put down because she blah, 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 blah. I had, there was a time that Barnaby was 100% retired. At that point, I had not decided to put him down yet, and that's a separate story, but he was 100% not going to be a riding horse, and that was clear. And so he was just hanging out, being buddies, and I had people basically send a message through the grapevine that they would buy him back, since, the only reason he wasn't doing anything was because of me and not me. It's all in here. And I know they wanted to get him and go put him through the ringer and make him go do something and show that it was all whatever, but it's like, it feels like a little bit of a gossipy place to like go back to and think about, but it honestly is a huge deal going through the vet process and like everything else that we had to go through, and trusting your gut and not just listening to all the chatter, whether it's someone you paid to chatter like the vet, or it's just people who choose to chatter. You gotta go with your gut, and I think Barnaby is definitely a good example of that. Yeah, he had things. I should have pulled up his report. Gosh, it's been a long time.
The big thing I remember on him, and I'll just say, when I worked on him, it was strange. He was so young. He wasn't doing, a ton of work. You were trying to work with him and figure out what was going on. You weren't pushing him, but he always had cranial structures that had compression or restriction, like the jaws, for instance, and some of the cranial bones, and then also pole upper neck. And, those things, every horse is going to have something. But again, for a 4-year-old that's not, really in heavy work, why am I finding that? And then in the hind end, I would find, I think it was the left SI. See, I kind of sort of remember this, left SI, and lumbar. And I'm like, he's got so many restrictions here. It doesn't really make sense to me. again, given all the factors. But the big thing that sticks out to me was I believe they found some sort of a cyst around C1, C2, so cervical 1 and 2 vertebra, the atlas and the axis. And near that junction is a very important nerve cluster called your cranial cervical ganglion. And it has branches to cranial nerves, muscles. It's a big nerve center, and it's really important. And it just kind of makes you wonder if having some kind of cyst there could have impinged upon that or affected all of the kind of efferents that are going out of there. And, also what happens then is those areas lock up. So then musculoskeletal wise, you're finding restriction here. But it's not a great place to find it because that's where some important nerve structures sit as well. And that's kind of the biggest thing I remember. I know there was more. And I think at the time, you were also very interested in the cervical malformations that Sharon May Davis had been doing a lot of research into. And I don't think you had a lot of luck getting people that's, for instance, on board with that, and also taking radiographs in a way that could show that. Yeah. But that's more common than people think. And it's, again, one of those things that's a little bit tough to really diagnose, again, unless you take these views just like her outlined or that she has outlined. But then also, a lot of those things you see in the bones when you're collecting the bones once an animal is passed. So I feel like you got a little pushback on that too. Because a lot of, I think, the symptoms that he was presenting were corollary to some of the cervical malformation symptoms that you were researching, like that not being connected front and back, maybe having some proprioceptive or even neurological type deficiencies. Mm-hmm. Things not being quite right, maybe moving around, and those were all things that could have pointed towards that.
Yeah. And that's what I mean when I mentioned not having a real diagnosis. I still think that's what it was.
Yeah.
But I will never know. And back at the time, I did have suspicions that's what it was. I had enough information at that point to really think it was a thing. And I remember I had some x-rays taken
of the neck, right?
Of the specific parts of the neck, but because they were not, I didn't yet have access to the there was an x-ray protocol that's
right
now. I didn't have that at the time. Now I did get access to that before he was put down, actually, but by that point I was done. He was already retired and never going to ride at that point for me. And that was where I kind of decided to just quit spending money and messing with him. To be honest, I was just done messing with him because it was very clear from other things that had happened that he was not going to be riding. It wasn't safe and it wasn't comfortable. So,
well, it wasn't safe. And that's where, just think of what would have happened if you did give him back or sell him back or whatever to these folks that wanted him, and you knew in your gut that horse may not be safe. And like for me, another, if I can just say, another really important thing that is controlled by that ganglion that I was talking about is your internal carotid. So that's blood flow to the brain, plumbing to the brain. And just with some of the things that he presented, it just, to me, it kind of makes sense why I found what I did in the front end. But then if I find that in the front end, anything on my COC1, C2, occiput, first cervical vertebra, second cervical vertebra is going to be connected to my sacrum via my dura mater, which is the protective covering of your spinal cord. Then it's like a tube, and then there's actual fascia. It's really fascia, deep fascia within the brain as well. So it basically connects, here all the way to your tail. And so anytime, one end locks up, that dural tube will have a reciprocal kind of influence on the other end. And for me, it was always, like I said, upper neck, pole, cranial structures, and then hind end. And you're going, but wait a minute, why is this so locked up? And I think a big part of that was his dura mater. And, anytime you have strain on that dura mater, what happens too is it hits your immunity and it hits your vitality, because what is inside that tube, and there's actually more layers of that kind of deep fascial protective covering of the spinal cord, it serves as like a semi-hydraulic system of fluid. And that fluid is your cerebrospinal fluid, which is produced in the brain, distributed throughout the body, is in charge of protecting the nervous system. It is metabolic in a sense too. And so, oh my gosh, I just lost my train of thought. There's the summer cold brain. And it all leaks. It's nutritioning the nervous system, but it all leaks into the lymph system too. So just to say that, again, that's your immunity. In osteopathy, we use that as a gauge for vitality. And if he had a lot of strain on those structures from an abnormality in his structure, I mean, the cyst, and there were other things, like little things here and there that she found, it would make sense to me that he would be inconsistent, vital one day, not vital the next. And he's growing, and so those things I think can kind of move around too. But anyways, I'm just kind of putting this all together from what I observed osteopathically. And I think I got a little bit on the kick of teeth too, during that time, which, not to say that's a bad thing to get on a kick on, but I was at that time really learning a lot about the teeth. And so it wasn't ever like a denigration of what your dentist was doing, but going, well, crap, he's 4. So he hasn't finished that eruption. The mature teeth haven't fully come in yet. And when that happens, their TMJs and pressures are changing constantly until, 5.5. And that can create a lot of proprioceptive issues, just because that's where, one of your main cranial nerves sit, that's in charge of balance and equilibrium. So, I was going, okay, if he's got a lot of compression here, and maybe part of that's because he's growing, maybe part of that's because of whatever, that could also contribute to that, just maybe not knowing where he was in his body, or not knowing where his body was.
Yeah, he definitely, times that he would seem so athletic, and then there'd be times that you're like, what's going on? Are you the same horse now? I think there's like 4 different horses going on.
Right. And personality wise, did you observe anything about him too? Like, did he have kind of a consistent personality or demeanor or behavior, or was that kind of
he was always, personality and behavior wise, I would say he was kind of always the same.
Okay.
But there was what I would call personality and behavior, I felt like was the same.
Because you knew him too.
Times where he was, I think now that you say the oxygen deprived thing, like I think that's what I was sensing.
It's an interesting, and I actually had asked my osteopathy professor a little bit about your horse, and so he said, what about vertigo? And I think that's why I said that to you. But, all of those things, there can be different causes for that, but not getting the right nutrition and oxygenation to the brain because it's a vascularity issue, or because your equilibrium and balance is off because something is entrapping that cranial 8 nerve that's creating issues. Take your pick, but there was something going on there, right? That we have some ideas about, that from a musculoskeletal perspective, I was feeling like, oh, okay, well, definitely there's some restriction here. So if there's some restriction here, and see, this is where the osteopathy kicks in. It's not only about what nerve structures are affected by that, because the bones are essentially a pathway for your nerve and vascular structures. But yeah, what is the vascularity doing? That's really important, you know. Maybe oftentimes overlooked because we're always looking at the nervous system, or like traditional chiropractic, for instance, is always looking at the nervous system, but it's actually the vascular system and the lymph system that's going to bring healing, nutrition, like I said, oxygenation to tissues. So just as important. But anyways, I digress.
I have a question I just thought of. So you mentioned restrictions and things that Barnaby had, and I know it's a word you've used plenty. I'm sure you use it a lot in your job. Do you feel like would Barnaby have felt different to you than a horse that had restriction from wear and tear? Like, you obviously knew the story because I told you, oh, he's 4 and he hasn't hardly done any work, but can you feel what is from wear and tear versus like, this is just different?
Well, yeah, no, good question. I think in essence, wear and tear, you know, means that either they have some age on them or they've got some miles on them. And so it's not that he necessarily felt like an older horse or a horse that had been used heavily, but yeah, just being that young, and actually the tissue in my hands wanting to be pliable, but something deeper blocking that was kind of what I felt with him. And he was also pretty consistently very defensive of his head and neck when I would try to go in and even just test it. And of course, I feel like I've gotten softer now, and my feel is hopefully just going to keep, you know, increasing the more I do it. So I'm sure however many years ago, if the 2024 Vanessa could be there, you know, trying to go through this stuff, that maybe he would have been a little more responsive. But there was this inherent defensiveness that I always find with horses, no matter what age, when there's a big structural issue going on. It's a deep defensiveness, and you can be as soft as you want, but they and they may up the ante or not, depending on how much you're causing them to brace when you're trying to test or just gently mobilize things or manipulate things. But yeah, to me, honestly, when I'm soft and I feel that horse really, really bracing, and also when you feel like there's a hard end feeling to the joint, that's a little bit of a red flag. So when we're talking about restrictions, and I'm glad you brought this up, when we're talking about restrictions, all it means is a lack of full range of motion. Depending on the joint, there's a lot of different ways that things can move. You know, my head can flex and, oh my God, flex and extend, not the other way around. Good Lord. And I can, well, this isn't flexion, but apparently my cold brain thinks it is. Okay, but just to say, and I'm moving like kind of my whole like head and neck, but you know, if I'm trying to just move back here, it's say OA, occiput, atlas, junction. You know, I extend, I flex, and then I have some side bend. Okay, well, it's the same with the horse or any other creature. There may be there are different motion possibilities. So, like for instance, when the chiropractor says, "Oh, that's out," or anybody says, "Oh, that's out," most of the time they don't really mean that something is out of place, because if you literally had something out of place, out of joint, you're going to have soft tissue injury, you're going to have a lot of pain, you're going to know it, and that horse is going to tell you. Now, a restriction again is just maybe my head does this and this, but it can't do that. Okay, so just because I have that one restriction does classify it as a restriction. It's just that it's one way out of 4, for instance, that it's not moving. Okay, but we call that a restriction. Somebody else may say it's out, but it's not that it's out. It's just not moving in a full range of motion. You can have positional changes. Sometimes you see this on horses that have really bad hunter bumps, where sometimes that sacrum has dropped and there has been some injury to the soft tissues and the sacroiliac ligaments that kind of hold that pelvis and sacrum together, that you could potentially classify as a subluxation. So not a full luxation, but somewhat of one, right? It's not sitting in position. So when you're talking about restrictions, usually if it's a true restriction and the joint can go there, but it just can't. So it physiologically can. It's going to feel like a rubber band. The feeling when you're checking the motion on that's going to feel like a rubber band. A hardened feel is just like what it sounds. That's concerning because, again, that can mean you've got a structural change. You also have something called an open-ended feeling where you're checking something and it just goes and it's painful. That's like, oh my gosh, there's an injury here. We need to have the vet look at this, like a luxation, for instance. So what I felt on him was certainly a harder end feeling, and just to put that in the context of a 4-year-old that's not in heavy work, you go, this isn't right. Something's not right here. And that's what I would feel from a bodywork perspective. Like I said, it's like the tissue wanted to go there, but the bones and the deeper fascial support systems weren't allowing it to.
That it makes sense, how it would feel different. Like, I'm sure a horse that is older and has had some hard miles, the tissue probably does not feel like it wants to go. But in his case,
right, and you're going to find it kind of peppered all over their body. With your guy, it was always the same areas, and it was like the middle of them was pretty fine, but the head end and the butt end, which
the front and the back was broken. Dang it! If only we got up the middle.
And it's interesting because whatever issues he had going on manifested visually for the veterinarian to go, let's inject the SIs. But just to say, then we had this stuff in the front end going on. That's how that transfers, right? That's the beauty and the curse of the way that our protective covering, what we call the meninges, are structured in our bodies to protect the spinal cord, and one end affects the other. And they're actually finding in horses that you actually have in the back muscles, like the deep postural back muscles, that there's a direct connection between those muscles and the outside covering of the protective meninges, the dura mater. But they actually they actually are like this. It's the same thing in the back of the head. They call it the myodural bridge in humans. And again, the fibers of your suboccipital muscles actually make a direct connection with your dura mater. In horses, they're finding that's also along some of their spine. So, just an I don't know why I keep going to the dura mater on him, but it's something that you say to people and you have to kind of explain it. But you say it to people and they don't really understand how that would be so damning. Or you say that to the vet and they're like, what? You can't see inside there. Yeah, but you can feel tension on it from these other structures, And interestingly enough, where he had that cyst, that's right where, on top of that is your suboccipital muscles. That's where your myodural bridge is. So there's a lot of important things happening around C1, C2. That's one thing. Also, your nuchal ligament burses sit there too. We already talked about the nerve structure that sits there, the ganglion that sits there. So, there's just a lot of stuff going on there. But oftentimes it's also going to present in the hind end.
I think too. Do you remember by chance his crazy front feet? He had very different front feet.
Oh, okay. And
I think it's one of those things that, like you said, the vet goes to the hind end, and that's where we would most often see stuff when I was trying to get him going. But yeah, at the time I was in a very different place on what I was doing for hoof care for every horse. So his wonky feet as I called them. It's a very official term, wonky.
And tell me, because I sort of don't remember, I don't think.
No.
Yeah.
Well, so they were just really different. And
okay. Yeah.
let's see, it was the right side one was like a lot bigger and it just was very different.
Yeah.
And I'm sure, like I said, I had a different program, but he never wore steel shoes or anything like that.
Yeah.
And I don't think you would have called him he wasn't clubfoot either.
Mm-hmm.
It just, they were a little weird.
They were different. And and you're going to find that to some degree, but if it's a more obvious difference, then that's like another red flag. So Jim Masterson has figured out that most horses are right front, left hind loading. So all that means is that they use it more. They prefer to use that diagonal more.
Like our right or left-handedness.
Exactly. Right. So they tend to like bend better to the left in their poll and their neck. They tend to go better on the left lead, for instance. And so a lot of times the bigger, kind of sometimes even flatter foot in front is the one they load more. And so it shows that he was loading that right front more. But again, when it gets to that much of a discrepancy, then we've got a problem. And so, I would always find that left SI on him. And so he's using that right front, left hind more, which is typical in a sense, but then I think it got really exaggerated, which is not normal. Yeah.
It got exaggerated, and when you would try to do the exercises to balance it back out that would normally work, it wouldn't work. Not that he couldn't do the exercises, but that's when he would get lame. It's like you would, you try to force that balance development, and the body's like, nope, not doing it. I don't care what exercise you do, it's not happening.
So. Yeah, and I think that and I'm sure you find this too, most horses, like humans, have a little bit of asymmetry, and that's to be expected, but it's again when it's very, very obvious and severe when we've got a problem. And I think the goal of the body work, of the training, is to try to get them more balanced, not necessarily symmetrical, but balance. Because if you've ever gone to PT like I have, it doesn't feel comfortable to use your body in a more functional, balanced way, and it's not it has to be something that you keep doing consciously to make it unconscious. And the same would be for horses, I'm sure. I mean, it is neuroplasticity, but I do think that term gets thrown around a little loosely with horses, because again, you can't say, hey, horse, do this, like you can to me at PT, to make me more aware of my asymmetries or imbalances. But with like what you're doing, you have to make the horse kind of go through those paces and ask him as he's doing that to use his body in a better way. And that has to be consistent for them to then automatically, unconsciously use their body like that. And you were trying to do that, but then he would be worse. Right.
Yeah. We would just hit either the same or a new wall, basically.
Yeah.
And that basically is what went on before we met you. Then we met you, and I feel like you started to obviously you have a whole other layer of depth that you look at, I feel like, which is what I was looking for.
Oh,
not that it's definitive answers, because it's
no,
not.
And honestly, let's be honest, I don't think the osteopathic treatments helped him much, and in the long run they didn't. And maybe they made him temporarily feel better, but they didn't fix anything. And that's what makes me I get a little irritated sometimes when I'm looking at posts or seeing things. These horses, sometimes they can't be fixed. And there's deeper things going on. So let's get real about the fact that we're not magicians. Okay.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and it's not just one person, right? Like we talked about that last time. It's the whole team. And, you know, again, it unfortunately, it took Barnaby having to be put down and actually looking at the structure then to be able to determine what was going on. You know, radiographs weren't going to show some of that stuff. Even a nuclear scan was just going to say, yep, there's some bone metabolism changes here, but it doesn't necessarily, again, give you a diagnosis. So I kind of think, based on what I remember from reading that report, you could have spent even more money, you know, on him and never really gotten the answers that you needed. And then again, you got the report, and it still didn't give you a diagnosis. It just said, here's a bunch of places where we've got some abnormalities in his structure.
Yeah. And, you know, at the time, you know, as we all would, we would do things differently, maybe.
I know,
but
yeah.
we can't, it's like you said, you can't be your 2024 Vanessa. You can't be 2015 Vanessa, you know? So I can't take the information I have now. If I could have, I would have had to get a diagnosis for it, a real diagnosis. I guess I could have chosen to go an x-ray route, but at that point it was like a deeper x-ray route than I already had. Obviously we had x-rays.
Well, you had taken some. Say you wanted to do like an MRI, or do they do CAT scans on horses? I'm sure they do. You know, sometimes they have to hang them up. They have, you know, sometimes doing the diagnostics is also kind of a little bit of a risk. And yeah, you could have spent even more money.
And it's certainly not just about the money. It's like every single time you choose to go down someone's path, someone being a or person is offering their suggestion of ways to fix it, you have to dedicate time. It's certainly not just about money, and it's not that I was in any rush to do anything, but you know, let's say that person suggests I practically don't even believe in stall rest anymore. Dare I say that out loud? But like, I practically don't believe there's certainly some things, but there are times looking back now that I was told to do stall rest for this or that, or do this thing, and you have to do stall rest after for this long, or they got to do this, that. To me, none of it got to a point where it's like, none of that stuff is worth, I'm not putting him through this anymore. It wasn't about me. It's like, just kind of done putting him through this and having to keep going through this, and him keep having, you know, he can't tell me I don't feel good. How did I find out? Oh, because he looks like he might pass out, or he looks lame.
Well, that could be a problem.
That's not cool. I'm not going to keep testing this for what?
Well, you didn't ask his sidekick
on him? No, I'm done testing. So
that was the only thing. You could have paid me like $1 million more, and I could have done that for you.
Done what for me?
I could have given you a psychic reading, and it probably wouldn't have.
Dang it. I would have found out everything I needed to know, I bet, too.
But in a sense, you were his own psychic. I mean, again, like, you know, you knew something wasn't right. Like, how valuable is that? And maybe that's a big message for people that are watching this particular session, is trust your gut. And like you said, the chatter might be there, whether even internal. Maybe you're internalizing everybody else's chatter because you think you're doing something wrong. You know, it takes a really secure person to be like, you know, I'm not wrong. You know, I'm not at fault. And so you got a lot of that. And so maybe that's helpful for people that are more tuned into their horses and know there might be something more going on, but don't feel like people have faith or believe in their intuition, or just their intimate knowing of their own animal.
Mm-hmm. I think you have to be seeking other opinions to do diligence. I do, but I certainly was doing that. I had plenty.
You were totally. You just didn't pay me to give you a psychic reading. That was the only wrong
Barnaby
thing
did
you
have
did.
a psychic reading, I'm sure. I'm pretty sure he probably had one. Definitely have had psychic readings on horses, so it's not to say that I'm thinking that's a worst idea, but I'm not paying $1 million.
Right. I don't think it is either sometimes. Yeah.
But anyway, and also, like you're saying, you got to trust your gut, yada, yada, yada. Just to be clear, it's not like I am so amazing and I just trust my gut and I knew and then I got this post-mortem. No, things had to happen for me to go, like things had to happen. But just know, keep checking in with your gut. Keep getting opinions, but keep checking back in with your gut and with your horse. Sit down and ask him and sit there. Wait and see what they tell you. Because, ultimately the day, not to get all morbid on us, but the day that I decided that I was not going to even keep him as a pasture pet, because there was a point where, like I'd mentioned, I was not going to have him ridden anymore, but I had a horse property and why not? Of course he can live his life out here and have a great time. Well, there came a point as he got older where even though he was not being worked, but just kind of played with and things and out and turnout and whatnot, there came a point where his proprioception got worse and worse. And he essentially was trotting out. I watched the whole thing, so I know exactly what happened. He's trotting out in the turnout and just on practically flat ground, out of nowhere, falls over, folded in half. Literally folded in half. And he didn't actually get injured in this fall. I didn't have to put him down. But watching your horse, I thought he had killed himself, quite frankly. I thought he had
that must have been scary
and broke his neck. I thought he broke his neck. And so anyway, he didn't. He managed to somehow flop himself out of that pretzel and get up. And but that was the day it was like, oh yeah, this is going to keep going downhill. It's not just about riding. Like, he is deteriorating. It's not like, oh, he just can't stay sound. No, he's deteriorating, just living. And that's where I had to make the decision to put him down. And of course, I wish he hadn't had to have that happen to him. I wish I didn't have to see it. But at the same time, had it not happened, could I have made the decision to put him down and just be like, just end his life? Like, that's not easy, that's a really big decision, and it feels like it's not even one that we should have to make, But anyway, it just goes to, listen to your gut. And if you may have to wait till something smacks you in the face like that, but just keep listening to your gut, and your horse will tell you what you need to know. And
well, and you were also open to information, and you sought that information out from different people, from different professionals. I think that's also a big part of this, because there is like this intuitive side of us that knows, and some people can develop that more than others. But then there's also this rational, logical side that seeks facts and takes facts into consideration. And it's kind of the marriage of those two types of knowing, I think, where there's a lot of power. And so you were kind of doing both of those things. It wasn't just, oh, I think, my gut's telling me something's wrong, so there's something wrong. But you also, invested the time and the money and the energy to kind of go on a fact-finding mission, and, had a really, I think, balanced perspective on it all. And yeah, I mean, and that's so unfortunate that, you had to, I'm like visualizing what he did in the turnout, which was kind of the last thing that then made you go, yeah, this can't go on. Like, I do think, unfortunately, some of our greatest lessons in life come from the biggest heartbreak. And life does, in a sense, slap you in the face. But it sets you on a path. I mean, I'm not going to get into it, but I mean, I certainly in my own journey of osteopathy have hit many walls and go, I don't know if this is worth it. Well, I can sit here today and go, yeah, it's worth it. But I kind of paid a price for that. Mm-hmm. And sometimes in life we earn those lessons.
Yeah. So that's kind of how it started with Barnaby, I suppose, was telling his story because, yes, I certainly was gifted with many, many lessons thanks to that horse.
Well, I know. And I like, especially with horses, boy, you learn a lot more than you ever bargained for when your horse is hurting, when your horse is uncomfortable, when you're trying to find answers and they have health issues. You exponentially gain this knowledge, unfortunately, is kind of how it works.
Yeah. And I guess that's one of the coolest things is how unfortunate and tragic his feels. But then I learned how to take that information and tune into horses so differently that you have to wait till they're broken to tune into them like that and to help them like that.
And it's a gift. And you know, I not to get too woo-woo, but I do feel like either we kind of subconsciously have these visions or intentions, or we come into this life with kind of a purpose, and that reveals itself to us however that does to put us on this journey. So at some point I think it was always in you to want to do things differently and to kind of be on this journey of rehabilitation and healing for the horses. And when you want something like that, even if it's not conscious, we tend to get, well, drug along into that direction, whether we want it or not, because of the cosmos and how we put this stuff out there that sometimes we're not even aware of. Now, that's an instance, though, of something good, I think, that gives us, you know, a purpose in life. I think you and I both have a purpose in life, but it wasn't necessarily the easiest road to get here. But I at some point wanted that, I think. Mm-hmm. And I'm good with that now. Now I can go back and say, yep, my journey through some of my schooling was worth it. But I don't know if I could have said that 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah.
You know, but in hindsight, you see what a gift that the tragedy was. And it kind of had to be that way to set you on the trajectory that you're on now.
Yeah, it's you get the horse you need. I know people say that all the time.
Wow, yeah. You get the man you need too, I guess.
What was that?
I don't know. I said you get the man you need too, I guess. Because relationships.
Well, that's another podcast. Sometimes you get the cat you need too, right?
You get. Yeah. Keep talking. Keep talking.
Over there? Okay.
Yeah,
but
I'm gonna wake him up. So just
anyway,
keep talking
yes,
to
you
me.
get the horse you need. You learn the lessons you need. I think that's true. You know, true in horses. It's true not in horses. It's and I think that's to circle back to what I was saying the other day about what did we say? I was saying that horses sometimes will their people will use some methods of training to overwrite some behaviors and things because their horse is struggling, but sometimes the other side of that struggle is where all the good stuff really happens, you know? So you can't it's a
at the time it's not fun.
He's so beautiful.
Hold on. He only has 3 legs.
That looks like a 4th leg, but it's a tail. Look at that, it's his tail.
He's so cool. I know. He's like, you woke me up, lady.
All that just to get on this
well, he needed his screen time today. Doesn't get it all the time. But yeah, you get the horse you need. You get the lesson that you, I think, always wanted to learn to be on the path, to be on your righteous path.
Yeah. Yeah, and you don't always know that's what's happening. Sometimes it feels like I wonder if you ever know. Does anyone ever go, wow, this is terrible, but clearly this is meant to be. I don't know. I mean,
I don't think at the time unless you're like certifiably insane and you're like some kind of a masochist and you
I know
want
it's
to be
something
hurt.
I have said to myself because you say things to yourself to try to get to the other side.
I know.
Of it. You know, I don't
to
know
get to the other side of it, right? Like getting through, getting through something difficult, working through difficult feelings. It's not fun. It's certainly different from just saying you're here. No, you have to work through it.
Yeah.
Again, unless you're a sociopath, which is different from a masochist and whatever else I said. But we're not here to discuss the DSM-V.
It's a different podcast, not ours. So we'll leave that up to those experts, I'm sure.
I am not an expert. The only expertise I have is what I do. But I do watch a lot of true crime and listen to podcasts and a lot of Dexter. So I do feel like I know something about the abnormalities of the human psyche, but you know what, I'll stick to horses, which I'm still not an expert in, really. I mean, we keep learning, I mean, there's a lot of people that say they're experts. Anyone can say they're an expert. And I'm like, well, where did you go to school? Or like, what's your training? Like, what's your resume? And you can't find it. So,
or just because you have your schooling and your fancy resume and the letters by the way, that doesn't mean everything.
That's true. And that you are right about that too.
It's
Absolutely.
No different than years of experience. You can have 30 years of experience doing things ways that I don't want to do them. So therefore your experience is kind of useless to me.
Yeah, if you've been doing this, go ahead.
Yeah, it's easy to you have to be careful that you don't get closed-minded and go like, yeah, your experience isn't for me. There is something we can learn from almost anybody and anything.
Isn't that the truth? Even from a self-proclaimed expert, there are good things out there to learn. Yes. Yeah. But that might be something we talk about at some point, too, is like, how do you find a professional in the equine industry, whether that's body work or a trainer, farrier, dentist, there's a lot of options out there. People get overloaded. Sometimes there's a lot of smoke and mirrors, but anyways,
I feel like professionals, I mean, I'm sure it's this way in all things, not just equine, but in equine world, whether it's trainers or a vet or a hoof care practitioner, whatever the heck department of the horse you feel like talking about, you have to build a relationship. I feel like the best training scenarios I have are with people I have worked with. It doesn't have to be a long time. It's not about the time, but like I've worked with them enough that I know many sides of them and they know many sides of me. And I feel like that's
really nice. I like that.
Work together the best,
Yeah.
The hard thing about that is it takes, just like with treating your horse, it takes time to do that. So you do kind of have to like commit to someone, whether you're using a vet or a hoof person or a trainer or whatever. You have to commit the time to find out really what they're all about,
Right.
And I like that for them to you, because if I look at a video of someone, I probably have a pretty good idea of what I'm gonna say if I saw them in person or worked with them in person. But there's definitely a different layer that you get when you've been with them in person, or even whether in person or not, honestly. It's over and over and over. You start to see all the sides, and also how they respond to things. I feel like in your work, like when you would see a horse the first time, you may do things, and then you come see him maybe on the 5th time, you have like really different things to say, and it's not because that horse is different, really.
Right. And to do, totally. I think everybody finds, their person in whatever capacity that you're looking for. And it's building that relationship. I mean, I know, like, whatever, I know, like, in therapy, like, one of the most important things to feel like you're having success in therapy is that you have a therapist that you get on with well, that you work with well, and you've put the time into each other, and they know you, so
I mean, I don't know.
you don't have
All
that,
the
so
horse practitioners mention how they double as therapists anyway. I guess this is why, because you really do got to get to know each other.
that's right. You do. Yes. And I think that and at a certain point too, you start to become skilled in your craft. Never perfectly skilled, right? It's always an evolution, but you're going to attract the people that have kind of a similar intention or a similar openness to what you're doing, and really really appreciate what you're bringing to the table.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We've been here over an hour.
I know. We
better
end
wrap
it
up. Did I even answer the story of Barnaby? I think I did, right? I mean,
well, I think we learned some valuable lessons about Barnaby's life and how it changed you, how it changed your journey. And talked about the importance of trusting what you know about your horse.
And keep looking for answers.
Yes.
And give each of those things that you look for a fair chance, which will take some time. It's very challenging.
It's going to take time. There's, rarely is there a quick fix. But I think that our culture, and especially with social media, anybody can read a post and go, oh, I know how to fix my horse. It's not like that.
Yeah. And, thinking back as well, sometimes there were times I thought Barnaby was fixed. I'll like randomly get these little like memories that'll come up on Facebook or whatever. And it's like, oh yeah, look, I think we've turned a corner. So sometimes that quick fix it feels like a quick fix, but really it's like, it's just quick. It's not a fix. You know what I mean? Give it a couple more months. And I think in Horseland, something else pops up. It's the same original problem, but people have no idea because they paid a lot of money and they fixed it. Now it's something else.
Right.
It's not. I think that is the thing I learned from Barnaby.
Wow. The lessons that Barnaby brought.
Yes. So many. So anyway, it was a lovely chat. I'm sure we'll...
It was very lovely.
It was lovely meeting you, Pesto. What a
Pesto
name.
says thank you.
I'm sorry we disturbed your nap, Pesto.
I know. We'll talk more about other things.
Again soon about who knows what, different things and the same things once again.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. Well, I will talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks. Bye.